Unit 4, Subunit 1, Technological Innovation. Innovations allowed Europeans to venture long distances across the ocean. The magnetic compass originating in China, the caravel, the smallest sailing ship made in Portugal, and the astrolabe improved by Muslim navigators were all tools helpful in navigation. In Europe, as the population grew, some could not find work or even food, and not all sons of wealthy could end up wealthy because of the primogeniture laws. They gave all to each of his state the eldest son and all the land. Century minorities searched for a place to settle that were tolerant. The American-European rivalry, Omani-European rivalry, was one of the reasons Christopher Columbus set search for a new route to India. His travel linked to Eurasia and to the Americas. The Americas, which they purchased sugar, tobacco, and rum. In Africa, they purchased slaves, and in Asia, they purchased silk, spices, and rhubarb. This trade transformed Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, France, and Holland into maritime empires that were based on sea travel. Scholars gained knowledge and improved the safety of sailing ships, and Newton's discovery of gravitation increased knowledge of the tides, and cartography also improved navigation. An astronomical chart is any map of the stars and galaxies, which mariners relied on these maps to guide ships in a certain direction, especially before the introduction of a compass. Several developments in equipment were used on ship for faster and safer sailing. The astrolabe, improved by Muslims, allowed mariners to determine how far north or south they were from the equator. The compass was a primary device used, and the lantern sail was a pivotal piece of technology used by Arabs in the Indian Ocean. This could allow both sides of the sail to get wind, allowing them to go in different directions, which resulted in long-term travel. The only area that was not affected by the rapid expansion and exploration of global trade was Polynesia, since it was so far removed. The introduction of gunpowder and other Chinese inventions aided the Europeans in their conquests abroad. North Africa trading cities along the Africa's east coast spread Islam rapidly, and the growth rate of the empires centered in Baghdad brought extended trade and technology to Africa.
Unit 4, Subunit 2, Causes and Events of Exploration. Due to improved navigation techniques, Italian cities with ports on the Mediterranean had a monopoly on European trade with Asia. By controlling access to the trade routes, the Italians controlled prices of Asian imports to Europe, driving Spain, Portugal, and later France, England, and the Netherlands into search for new routes to Asia. Explorers hoped to find riches overseas, especially gold and silver. In addition to these economic and political reasons, explorers were interested in converting others to Christianity. Also, technological breakthroughs in sailing and navigation made bold new voyages possible. Christopher Columbus is credited with discovering the New World. He was fortunate in 1492 to gain support of the Spanish monarchs Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand for his voyages across the Atlantic. His journeys helped increase the interest in discovery, and the English, French, and Dutch supported later exploration. In no nation were the interests of the state and interests of explorer as closely tied as they were in Portugal, which led the way in European exploration as it had in maritime innovations. The small kingdom of Portugal, bounded on the east by the Spanish kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, could expand only overseas. 3 people led its exploration: Prince Henry, the navigator, Bartholomew Diaz, and Vasco da Gama. To ensure control of trade, the Portuguese had constructed a series of forts stretching from Hormuz on the Persian Gulf to Goa in western India to Malacca on the Malay Peninsula. The aims for fort construction was to establish a monopoly over the spice trade in the area and to license all vessels trading between Malacca and Hormuz. The forts gave Portugal a global trading post-empire warm based on small outposts rather than control of large territories. The Portuguese also restricted Indian Ocean trade to those who were willing to buy permits. In the 1500s and 1600s, the French government sponsored expeditions in search of a Northwest Passage. In 1533, for example, French explorer Jacques Cartier sailed from the Atlantic Ocean into St. Lawrence River at today's northern U.S. border. He did not find a new route to Asia, but he did claim a part of what it is now Canada for France. Eventually, explorers such as Cartier and Samuel de Champlain realized there are valuable goods and rich resources available in the Americas, and there is no need to go beyond Asia. In 1497, the English king sent explorer John Cabot to America to look for the Northwest Passage. Cabot claimed lands from Newfoundland south to Chesapeake Bay. The English, however, did not have enough sea power to defend themselves against the Spanish naval forces, although English pirates called sea dogs sometimes attacked Spanish ships. In 1588, the English surprisingly defeated and destroyed all but 1/3 of the Spanish Armada. With that victory, England declared itself a major naval power and began competing for lands and resources in America.
Unit 4, Subunit 3, Columbian Exchange. The interactions of Western Eastern Hemisphere brought seas, fruit, and animals, in which Christopher Columbus played a crucial role in establishing the link, which became known as the Columbian Exchange, which had far-reaching effects in population and biodiversity. Spanish soldiers called conquistadors such as Francisco Pizarro and Hernando Cortez brought smallpox with them to the Americas, which was a pathogen spread through the respiratory system. As colonizers started to settle in America, so did insects, rats, and other disease-carrying animals. Measles and influenza and malaria, in addition to smallpox, killed many natives of the Americas. The America's population fell more than 50% in a century alone, having one of the greatest human population disasters in human history. Another major factor of sharing crops and livestock was meat. At first, the Mexico knew nothing of pigs or cows until Europeans introduced these animals along with Mediterranean foods such as bean creeps became a staple. Pigs became a staple in the American diet. Another domesticated animal known as the horse transformed the culture of the American Indians who lived in the plains. They can now hunt buffalo on horseback, so they had a surplus of food. However, it gave them time for other activities such as art and spirituality. The Europeans took back food such as maize, potatoes, tomatoes, beans, peppers, and cacao to their home countries where they were grown. Potatoes became so popular that they were thought of as being native to certain regions such as Ireland. Okra and rice in Africa and tobacco and cow in the Americas were made through forced labor and sold to consumers in Europe, Africa, and Middle East, while Spain and Spanish-American profit from silver to Portuguese focus on agriculture. Brazil became the center of Portuguese American Empire. and it was a perfect land for sugarcane cultivation. However, since disease decimated the population, there were not enough workers, so slavery became an option in European markets, which dramatically increased the number of slaves captured and sold through the transatlantic slave trade. Sugar plantation processes so much sugar that they became referred to as hung-nos, which means engines in Portuguese. Since these engines had such horrible working conditions, plantation owners lost 5 to 10% of the labor force per year. The growing cash crops in Portugal became the main money maker, like sugar in European empires. The African diaspora, or dispersion of Africans in Africa, did not lead to all culture being lost. Languages were not able to translate to the languages of the Americas. West Africans combined the languages of various countries and colonizers to create language broadly known as Creole. Africans in their music, such as gospel, blues, jazz, rock and roll, hip hop, reggae, and country music, helped them a lot through the hard days and surviving the plantations. In addition, rice and okra, Africans also brought gumbo.
Unit 4, Subunit 4, Maritime Empires Link Regions. European nations, driven largely by political, religious, and economic rivalries, established new maritime empires and administered trading posts in Asia and Africa, and colonies in the Americas. Asian trade frequently exchanged silver and gold for luxury goods such as silk and spices, while newly developed colonial economies in the Americas often depended on agriculture. American plantations relied on existing labor systems and also introduced new labor systems. Among these were indentured servitude, which was arrangements through which servants contracted to work for a specific number of years in exchange for passage to America. Another was chattel slavery system, in which individuals were considered as property to be bought and sold. People were being seized and enslaved and captured. In the storyteller song of the West African wildlife people, the growth of the plantation economy increased the demand for enslaved Africans in the Americas, leading to significant demographic, social, and cultural changes. Before the arrival of Europeans in the late 15th century, the Aztec Empire and Mexico and the Inca Empire in South America each included 10 to 15 million people. However, the spread of European diseases brought the population to plummet. Both empires collapsed quickly when attacked by Spanish forces. In the Andes of South America, Francisco Pizarro and his crew attacked the Inca and captured their ruler. Pizarro offered to release the ruler if the Inca would fill a large room with gold. The Inca complied. However, in 1533, the Spanish killed the ruler anyway. By 1572, the Spaniards had completed their conquest of the Inca Empire. Now let's discuss why Africans were a main target for slavery in America. Several factors converged to make Africa a target for slave raids by Europeans after 1450. Slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean began toward the end of 16th century when European conquistadors saw fortune in gold, silver, and sugar. Land was plentiful, but labor to make the new land profitable was scarce. Europeans initially forced indigenous people to do hard labor of mining and farming, but European diseases wiped out large population of these laborers. But the Africans would not be wiped out by diseases. The enslaved indigenous people that were familiar with the land and had social networks that would protect them and could easily camouflage themselves within the native population. Repeated efforts since slave Native Americans failed, although another efforts to coerce labor did have some success. While most Africans who were enslaved and transported to the Americas came from the West and Central Africa, there were long-running slave trade in the eastern part of the continent by routes overland or the Indian Ocean. Enslaved East Africans were sold the buyers in North Africa, the Middle East, and India. Many were transported to the lands off the southeast coast of Africa, such as Madagascar. The trade reached its peak in the 18th and 19th century.
Unit 4, Subunit 5, Maritime Empires develop. Sea-based empires transformed local small-sailing and large-scaling international trade using gold and silver. These empires used new economic models such as joint stock companies, which various investors financed trade by buying shares in corporations such as the East India Company, supporting trade in Asia. New trade routes were opened, which helped extend the global economy. The Atlantic trading system involved the movement of labor, including enslaved people, and the mixing of African, American, European cultures and people, which all groups contributing to a local synthesis. Silver, sugar, and slavery were key factors in the development of these capitalist empires. The accumulation of capital in the 17th century, material wealth available to produce more than wealth than Western European grew in entrepreneurs and entered long-distance markets. Money went from entrepreneurs to laborers, putting laborers in a better position to become consumers and even possible investors. The transformation of trade based using gold and silver is known as a commercial revolution. This affected all regions of the world that had four key factors: development of European overseas colonies, the opening of new traders, population growth, and inflation. The high rates of inflation, or generalizing prices, is called the price revolution, happening in 16th and 17th century. The rise of the global economy, joint stock companies owned by investors sprung up, which offered limited liability in which the investor is not responsible for a company's debts or other liabilities beyond the amount they invested. The British East India Company and the Dutch East Indian Company were joint stock companies, but the government did most of the investing itself. The Dutch became the commercial middleman of Europe, which it set up and maintained trade routes in Latin America, North America, South America, and Indonesia. And the ships were faster and lighter than the rivals of that century. The Europeans wanted slaves in Americas. In addition, the Portugal discovering of West Africa meant that it became a source of new labor. The enslaved Africans became part of the Atlantic trading system known as triangle trade. They had three segments as a ship carried manufactured goods and firearms to West Africa, where they got slaved, which were transported to the Americas, and they took those sugar and tobacco from the Americas to Europe. New monopolies sprung up along with these trading networks. And it was maintained through these monopolies. By European rumors, the monopolies granted certain companies and governments or merchants exclusive rights to trade. For example, the Spanish government made a monopoly over domestic tobacco grown all over in America colonies. This was in which the Spanish government, at the time, the regional market began to continue to flourish in Afro-Eurasia, but this improved shipping offered merchants to increase the volume of their product. The Atlantic slave trade greatly weakened many West African kingdoms, such as the Congo. They lost many people due to population decline, violence among societies, and competition spread, and slavery. And the kingdom became dependent upon goods from the Europeans. The societies that conducted slavery, such as Dahomey and Oyo, became richer because they sold captives to Europeans and gained firearms, which helped raiders get more captive. Gender distribution in West Africa became greatly imbalanced because 2/3 of the males were kidnapped or sold into slavery. Traditional political structures in Latin America were replaced by Spanish and Portuguese. Colonial administrations, Spanish royalty appointed viceroys that acted as administrators of the Spanish crown. They also established audiences or courts that could appeal his decisions or policies. The indigenous people lost a lot of culture and history due to the conquerors or conquistadors, such as Cortez in Mexico, who ordered the burning of the books. The lack of first-hand accounts from indigenous peoples showed and shaped how historians view the subject. The increased global connections resulted in religions extending and the developments of systems in other areas in religious conflict. In the African religion in Americas were combined, also known as syntheism, which combined all aspects of Christianity. Enslaved Africans also gave roots to the African American Church, which was a hybrid of Christianity and African spiritual traditions. About 1 in 10 enslaved Africans practiced Islam, which became the first prevalent aspect of Islam in the Americas. Catholic religious orders in Europe, such as Dominican Francis, accept missionaries, Latin Americas to convert them. These religions were also developed in Africa. As the interactions increased, Sufism, focused on personal salvation, helped spread through Sikhism, which blended both Hindu and Muslim beliefs.
Unit 4, Subunit 6, Internal and External Challenges to State Power. In the 16th and 17th centuries, powers around the globe saw stronger governments and larger empires abroad. As governments grew stronger and empires developed, a variety of groups resisted to stay expansion through social, political, and economic challenges to state power. Some of these revolts occurred in the home of the empire as citizens fought overreaching governments. Other disturbances took place within colonies where indigenous people stood against foreign control. Let's discuss the resistance in Russia. The practice of serfdom benefited the government because it kept the peasants under control, regulated by nobility. Serfdom also benefited the landowners because it provided free labor through townspeople were also controlled and not permitted to move their business freely to other cities. The serfs were practically enslaved, their labor bought and sold along with the lands of the owners. The peasant rebellion in Russia started in 1774 against Catherine the Great for giving the nobility over the serfs on their lands in exchange for political loyalty, which led the peasants without ties or recourse to the state. Spain also experienced rebellion within its territories. The Pueblo Revolt took place in 1680 against the Spanish, what is now New Mexico. The Pueblo and Apache, two indigenous groups of people, fought colonizers who were trying to force religious conversations. The indigenous people killed about 400 Spaniards, drove the rest out of the area, and destroyed churches. The Spanish conquered the area in 1692. Although Spain colonized much of the Caribbean, England's power there grew stronger. England defeated Spanish colonists and took control of much of Jamaica in 1655. Enslaved people in the Caribbean and former Spanish territories in the Americas fought to gain freedom in what were known as the Maroon Wars. Struggles for power took place within England as well. In 1685, James II became king. James was Catholic, and his anti-Protestant measures and enraged many English people. A group of nobles invited William of Orange, who was James's nephew and son-in-law, to invade England with an army and became the new king. He agreed, landing in England in 1688. James fled to France in 1689. William and his wife Mary II, which is James's daughter, began their joint rule in England. Both William and Mary were Protestant, and the England throne remained Protestant hands after that.
Unit 4, Subunit 7, Changing Social Hierarchies. As societies went through rebellions from the outside and within, the hierarchies began to change and transform. In Europe, the treatment of Jews showed that the majorities treated non-minorities in different ways. Jews were expelled from England, from France, from Spain, and not, however, the Ottoman Empire, which was actually a safe haven from discrimination, showing the religion's tolerance. Throughout the world, civilizations developed in different ways, with royalty, nobility, landowners, scholars, soldiers, and all seeking different types of power. A middle class began to form, such as peasants, serfs, poor people, and enslaved people who actually struggled to stay alive. In Ottoman society, it was built around a warrior aristocracy, which began to compete for positions in the bureaucracy with the ulama, who were scholars and experts in Islamic law. The military Janissaries gained power and prestige. The Janissaries tried to mount a coup against the sultans, which was because the sultans were incapable and ineffective in leadership. Advisors called viziers gained influential positions in government where they spoke for the sultan. However, the sultan had great power. This included the timar, which was a system which gave the sultan land and tax revenues to those he favored. The sultan also used the timar to reward soldiers and keep them loyal. The treatment of minorities and religions in the Ottoman Empire was one reason for the success of the empire. Mehmed II invited Jews to settle in Istanbul, which many did. Some became physicians and diplomats of the Ottoman Empire, and others contributed to literary community and the printing press, which was brought to the Ottoman Empire. While they were allowed to worship, they did not have full equality. They were allowed to live within specific areas of the city. They paid a tax called a jizya, which required all non-Muslims of the empire to pay, and they could not hold top positions in the empire. In the Mughal Empire, Akbar the Great, who ruled from 1556 to 1605, showed the greatest religious toleration in the empire. And in order to keep his huge empire together, he became tolerant and ended the jizya tax. And in the Ottoman Empire, women were very important as they played a social and political role at the court. Many wives and concubines of the sultan tried to give their children as heirs. This practice resulted in the harem, where a powerful man's wives and concubines lives. Rox Alina became unusually powerful in the Ottoman Empire. When she was a young girl, Crimean raiders stole Roxolina from her home empire and sold her into slavery. She was forced to convert to Islam and enter the harem. And she married Suleiman, which was highly unusual for a woman of the harem. Her son succeeded Suleiman. During her son's reign, advisors complained about a sultanate of the woman, which they believed had too much influence on politics. She showed that it was rare and possible for people at this time to attain a different social class that they were not given at birth. Merchants and artisans formed a small middle class in the empire. Below were the peasants, who were in the majority, usually poor, and paid a tribute to the government in order to help Ottoman empires and its army. The Barbary pirates piled the seas near North Africa along the Barbary coast and captured Europeans of the Mediterranean and sold them to sultan or high-ranking officials.